Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently swore in his new cabinet, and there were some major changes. Are they good or maybe bad changes for Canadians? To talk about this in a little more detail is Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachael Harder joining us here in Lethbridge. Rachael, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Hi, Hal. It's so good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you've been a big, staunch supporter of Alberta's energy sector, the oil and gas industry. What do you think of the appointments of Stephen Guilbeault, a former Greenpeace activist, as Environment Minister, and Jonathan Wilkinson as Natural Resources Minister? Many feel that these appointments are a direct attack on our energy sector.
Well, I think this is bad news for Canada, and it really couldn't get much worse for Alberta. We're talking about a man who really is a stunt activist. We're talking about an individual who, ran around in an orange jumpsuit with Greenpeace labeled on the front of it. And he hung from the CN Tower in order to draw attention to his cause. So he has spent a lifetime basically, going after those who would develop the oil and gas sector or those who would work within the industry. It's sad. It's really sad. And, probably the biggest reason why it's sad is because instead of focusing on developing Canada's energy sector, where we do it from a place of being incredibly environmentally responsible, we have some of the strictest laws in the world. We provide people with a good wage. We treat people fairly. It's clean oil. And instead of developing our sector, really what this minister is going to choose to do is Guilbeault is then going to actually support foreign oil. So foreign, dirty blood oil that is produced with little to no ethical standard, little to no environmental standard. And really, he's then supporting the development of jobs in places like Russia or Saudi Arabia instead of developing them right here in our own country. It's a sad day for Alberta.
That must be very frustrating as well when you see the demand for oil going through the roof right now with a lot of developing nations, and our hands are really tied here in Alberta. It must be very frustrating.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, as soon as this announcement was made, it certainly was soul crushing for me, but I think for many Albertans. We work incredibly hard to support this country. We work very, very hard to support our families. And ultimately, at the end of the day, energy is the source of life. Without it, we really can't function in our day-to-day. And so I recognize the need to transition and to look at alternative energy sources by all means. But the reality is, oil and gas is here to stay. We do need to continue to support this industry here at home. Otherwise, we're just simply sending money overseas and developing someone else's industry.
Now, your party leader, Aaron O'Toole, said Prime Minister Justin Trudeau picked a number of inexperienced MPs to become ministers, choosing style over substance. Would you really agree with that statement? And if so, why?
Hal, I would agree with that statement. And here's why. I think it's the Prime Minister's responsibility to put together a cabinet based on merit or ability. He should be choosing the strongest women and men from within his caucus to help lead this country forward. We're at a crossroads here. We're at a place where we need strong, capable leadership at the helm. Unfortunately, Justin Trudeau did not look at people based on their merit. Instead, it was simply an opportunity for him to choose, based on wanting to send virtue signals to the Canadian public. I think that's a sad day for Canadians, because at the end of the day, Canadians deserve to be governed well. They deserve to have individuals who are leading us because they are capable, because they have the experience, because they are going to do a good job. Let's take, for example, Hal, Melanie Joly. She was Heritage Minister, and then she was Minister for Tourism. She failed, arguably, at both of these portfolios, and they're minor. And now she's been given, global affairs, which is one of Canada's largest and most important portfolios. We're talking about Canada's relationship with places like China and Russia. We're talking about, important matters of having to do with global security and a way forward. It's not a time to choose someone based on wanting to send a virtue signal to the Canadian public. Instead, it was a time to choose someone based on their ability to lead us through this difficult time.
Now, Rachael, you recently took to social media blasting the Liberals for not giving Canadians employment insurance benefits if they lose their job due to not being vaccinated. Now, many would agree with you that it's simply wrong, but other people would say, being vaccinated is important since it really protects you and others from COVID-19.
Well, I think, first off, this is not a discussion about whether or not vaccines are good or bad. Vaccines have been proven to be effective for sure. This is actually a discussion about coercion. This is a discussion about Canadians and their right to choose. This is a discussion about respecting our fundamental rights and freedoms as described under the Charter. So when we have individuals who are willing to be tested on a daily basis, hardworking individuals who make this choice, they're willing to be tested on a daily basis. Many of these individuals have defended us on the front lines, whether that's through nursing or being a doctor or a firefighter or a police officer, a social worker, et cetera. Many of these individuals would prefer to do daily testing. The government is saying, no, that's not an option. And if you should lose your job because you choose not to be vaccinated, then you are not going to be able to qualify for EI, which EI is something that these individuals have paid into. It's not the government's money, it's their money. It's simply being held in trust until needed. Well, perhaps it's needed. And so it is unthinkable, it is unimaginable that the government would then usurp its authority to keep your money from you in a time of need. It's absolutely wrong.
Now, speaking of money, many economists agree that Canada has a little bit of a spending problem. We also hear the same message from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which says our debt is now over $1 trillion. In fact, Canada's inflation rate rose to a new 18-year high at 4.4%. I mean, buying food and shelter and gas just keeps going up, Rachel. How can we help bring these things under control and make life more affordable for Canadians?
Yeah, Hal, you're asking a very important question, and it's the one that is on the minds of many Canadians. We've all noticed that the cost of living has gone up dramatically. A recent Angus Reid poll showed that over a third of Canadian families found it difficult to put enough food on their table during the pandemic. That's scary. When we're talking about the basic necessities of life being held at bay because people cannot afford it. Why can they not afford it? Let me tell you. They cannot afford it because of inflation, because the cost of living is going up, everything from rent to gasoline to food. And so as a result, then people are not able to look after their families. But what I find interesting, Hal, is actually when we look at the stats, their income, the average Canadian income actually has gone up over the last year. Meanwhile, the cost of living, though, has skyrocketed so much more than their income has. And so as a result, it doesn't balance out and people are having to pay a lot more to live. Because that's the case, it puts us in jeopardy as people, it puts us in jeopardy as a country, et cetera, et cetera. You asked about the answer. The answer is simple, Hal. Stop printing money. Stop spending money that we don't have. Stop borrowing. Instead, return to fiscal responsibility, return to balanced budgets, and allow Canadians to actually earn a dollar that really counts as a dollar and be able to afford the life that they deserve to live.
You know, spending the money we don't have, that actually segues nicely into our next point here. Now, the federal director from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, who's a regular in our program here, he talked about the 2 salary increases the MPs received during the pandemic and how it wasn't the greatest timing considering how many Canadians are still struggling. Can you respond to that?
Oh, I'd love to, Hal. I wrote a letter on both occasions asking that the wage not be given to me. I fundamentally disagree with it. Full stop.
Did any other MPs join in your efforts? Did you talk to them as well, saying, you know what, this is bad timing right now, guys. Think about what we're doing.
Yeah. You know what, Hal, unfortunately, at the end of the day, there's a piece of legislation that basically just puts it into motion year to year. There's a salary increase that takes place every spring. The only thing that can stop that is if the Prime Minister brings a bill or a motion to the House of Commons, which I would have invited, in fact, did invite through my letter, and the Prime Minister turned that down.
Wow. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced as well that Parliament will not return until November the 22nd. Now, you and many other Conservative MPs said that is way too long to get back to work. Why the delay by the Trudeau Liberals?
Well, I suppose your guess is as good as mine, but if I was to offer my own observation as a sitting member of Parliament, I would say if Parliament doesn't sit, then there's little opportunity for opposition to oppose or give accountability. And so I think, Justin Trudeau, for whatever reason, seems to be afraid of these things. He seems to be afraid of being held accountable. He seems to be afraid of the parliamentary precinct and all that comes with that. And so he really would prefer not to be there, which is ironic because he ran for election. He ran to become the prime minister of this country, which includes sitting in the House of Commons, making tough decisions, and being held accountable by the official opposition and other opposition parties. Now he's saying, no, 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 no. Actually, he doesn't really want that. He just kind of wants to do his own thing, including going to Ticino with his family. That's wrong. It's wrong that this country has a prime minister that is not wanting to do the very job that he's elected to do. And he is refusing to be held accountable for the decisions that he is making in the meantime. It's, I think ultimately at the end of the day, Canadians have an opportunity to speak up, to speak out, and I would invite them to do so. Please write letters. Please speak to your friends and family. Please go to social media. Please call upon the Prime Minister to take his seat in the House of Commons and to resume Parliament. We need it now.
Now, once Parliament is back in session, will controversial bills like the one that died on the table during the election, Bill C6, adding conversion therapy to the criminal code, will these be brought back and resurface?
I would say it's certainly very likely that we will see some of these controversial bills come forward. You gave one example, Bill C6. It's my hope that if it's revisited, that it'll be reviewed thoroughly. It was rushed through in the spring, and there were many good amendments brought forward by experts from across the country, and those amendments were ignored. And I think Canadians deserve to have due process taken, and so those amendments should be revisited, and many of them should be taken in order to strengthen that legislation. But I think there's two other bills that are front of mind for myself and for many other Canadians as well, and that is Bill C10 and Bill C36, which have to do with censorship. And so we're talking about a government that is wanting to censor what we can and cannot say online, as well as the information that we can and cannot access. It's wrong. Again, many legal experts have weighed in on this, and they have said that these pieces of legislation go further than places like China, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. That's not a place we want to be held. We're a free democratic state. We want to keep ourselves that way. And so I will be opposing Bill C10 and Bill C36 with everything in me. And I invite Canadians to join me in the good fight.
Yes, we love our home and native land and our freedom, definitely. Rachel, many social conservatives believe that during the last federal election campaign, Tory leader Erin O'Toole, your leader, went a little too far to the left, a little too far to the center on a number of issues, including changing his mind on the carbon tax. How can the Conservative Party of Canada win back this support and show Albertans and Canadians that they're still, in fact, conservative?
It's a fair question, Hal. Certainly, I was out there knocking on thousands of doors during the election, and I definitely heard some concern from a cohort within, within what would be conservative support normally. There was some disappointment, and there continues to be some disappointment. I'm disappointed. I think many of my caucus members are disappointed. I think Erin O'Toole himself is disappointed. It's certainly not the outcome we were hoping for. And so, now we have an opportunity, and I would even say a responsibility, to go back and assess the decisions that were made and to ask, are those the decisions that are in the best interest of Canadians? And, are we in line with what the grassroots members of our party are asking for or calling for? I mean, after all, we are a grassroots-led party, which means we do have to turn to our membership and we do have to give them a voice. And so I think in the coming months, every effort needs to be put forward to hear those individuals who have something to say on this issue. And then we have a responsibility to respond accordingly. And ultimately, it's Mr. O'Toole who's going to need to lead that process.
Let's talk about one of the referendum questions on the recent ballot from the municipal election here, and it was about reforming equalization. Now, the majority of Albertans voted yes to the idea, and apparently Premier Jason Kenney says he's going to take this message to Ottawa, present it to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. But Rachel, let me ask you something. You've got the pulse of what's happening on the Hill. Do you think the Prime Minister will heed the message from Albertans and actually look into making this more of a fair deal for us?
Again, a great question, and something that very much grieves me. We have a Prime Minister who really couldn't care less about the province of Alberta and even Western Canada as a whole. We have a Prime Minister who's very committed to pitting one region against another. And we see that time and time again in the legislation that he brings forward and the decisions that he makes for this country. One prime example would be Bill C-69, which is a discriminatory environmental bill that is a direct attack on Alberta and the things that allow us to prosper. Now, what's interesting enough is that the Prime Minister is more than happy to punish us for the things that deliver prosperity, such as oil and gas. However, he also still wants the money that traditionally comes with that sector. You can't have it both ways. And so I think Albertans are speaking up. Nearly 62% of Albertans said they want to see reform. They don't like the deal that we're getting right now. They don't think it's fair. And so, it is my hope that Premier Kenney is successful in being a voice on behalf of Albertans, that he's able to push for change, and ultimately that Albertans are respected for the incredible contributions that they make to this country. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, a strong Canada means a strong Alberta.
Amen to that. Lethbridge MP Rachael Harder, thanks so much for your time today.
It's my pleasure, Hal. Thanks so much for having me.